Thank you, everybody, for joining us today in today's Cyberpion Attack Surface Protection Series webinar entitled Cybersecurity New Year's Resolution, Go on the Offensive. My name is Colin White. I'm in marketing at Cyberpion. Before we get started, I want to cover just a couple of housekeeping items. So we are recording today's webinar presentation, and we'll be sending you a link to the webinar recording within the next day or so after the presentation. So keep an eye out for that. The other thing is we're going to be going through the presentation probably in about 20-25 minutes today, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So we'd ask you to, if you have any questions during the course of the presentation, please enter them in the Q&A panel, which you should see along the bottom of your screen. And we will answer questions at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'd like to introduce Tally Netzer. She's the Director of Product Marketing here at Cyberpion. She'll be giving today's presentation. So I'll pass it over to Tally.
Thanks, Colin. Welcome, everyone. Let's dive in. So when we set this webinar up, one of the things we were looking at is where we are today versus how we even got here or what that progression was. And if you look at cybersecurity generations, starting from the first one, we started focusing on protection. Protection is about securing the perimeter. The first thing that comes to mind are things like firewalls. From that, we moved to a reaction state of mind. So it is assume a single breach and then react to it. What I will review in the next few slides is why this is not really working today. And as we are now on the brink of the third generation, which is around proactive prevention and going on the offensive, how we can better reduce risk and manage the increasing complexity that we're facing. So let's take a quick look at modern enterprise IT. And I know that in many cases, you've been used to seeing things like enterprises and, cloudification and how things are getting more complex. But there's another way to look at this. If we look at what's happening, it's almost like everyone, is enjoying this. Everyone is having fun. We're accelerating, we're scaling, we're much more agile in our business. However, all of these trends have an impact on cybersecurity. So as we become more digital and adopt the cloud and build more apps, as we're seeing more complex IT environments, which are hybrid on premises across, multiple public clouds, diverse technologies, because there are multiple generations in different deployments across this space. And it's really about a perimeter-less type of environment. So if we started with that very well-defined perimeter, right now, as there are more M&As and more subsidiaries in place, as we adopt more SaaS platforms and rely on more and more third-party vendors and services, which obviously have their own third-party vendors and services, we are creating a very complex and interconnected attack surface where at the end of the day, what we are seeing is that a lot of it is uncontrolled and unknown to the organization. At the same time, there's a growing threat landscape. And if you just look at the graph, it's very clear. This is from the CVEs that are documented by NIST. And 2022, we hit record numbers with over 25,000 new CVEs documented. There is, since 2014, there is a growing consistent trend. It's growing at 23% per year. And the projections are that by 2025, cyber crime will be the third largest global economy, which is really, it's a daunting task trying to deal with all of this. And what we are seeing is that we're not dealing that well. We have recently completed a Fortune 500 attack surface research in Cyberpion. And I just wanted to give you a quick glimpse of the outcomes or findings, because I think they really highlight some of the issues that we're dealing with, broadly. So the average Fortune 500 company has 10,000 assets. When we count assets specifically in Cyberpion, we're talking about fully qualified domain names, so domains and subdomains. Out of those 100, out of all of the Fortune 500s, 98 have critical vulnerabilities. So virtually all Fortune 500 have critical vulnerabilities. And on average, they've got a few hundreds of those. So on average, it's 361 critical vulnerabilities. This obviously varies greatly between different industries, but this is not the end of the game. So the external facing assets are a big, massive core part of the attack surface, but it's not all of it. There is the external dependencies. So as you map outward connection from your internet-facing assets, we can see that the Fortune 500 organization depend on average, 3,000 different external assets. All of the companies within that Fortune 500 scan, all of them had at least one critical vulnerability in an externally connected asset. Now, when we assess these things, and I'll talk more about that later, not all of them bear the same risk. And the risk varies based on the connection, whether it's a strong connection or not. So when we factored that in, what we saw is that 62% of the organizations have a critically risky connection. On average, that's 8 of those, 8 critically risky connections on Fortune 500 companies. And if we just put that in perspective, what we're seeing is that even market-leading organizations are facing a daunting number of critical vulnerabilities and much more that are not critical. When we talk about going on the offensive, what does this mean? In the context that we've just talked, I think we have to understand that there is no such thing as no risk. What we need to talk about is how we effectively reduce risk. And that means shifting our focus to what is urgent and what is important. What is the exploitable attack surface? How do we get from the haystack of information, of assets and security issues, and all of the information that we have, to a very meaningful and very focused exploitable attack surface that we can then act on to reduce our risk. And then over the next few slides, that's what I'm going to discuss. The process at a very high level is quite simple. You want to discover and map everything that you've got. So all of the assets, you want to test and scan to understand what the security issues are. Then you want to bring a higher level of understanding by contextualizing and prioritizing. And last but not least, obviously, it's the remediation step. It's how do we accelerate that? So let's go one by one. When you look at discovery and mapping, one of the things that we have found, but not only us, ESG research, one of their findings is that the attack surface is typically 30% bigger than you think. And that 30% only talks about the asset that you own. That is without looking at those external connections and dependencies. What this means, and it's essential part of the concept of attack surface management, is that we don't assume that we know. We don't expect customers to bring lists of what they know. The process starts with discovery, and it is a continuous discovery process with the goal of uncovering everything that you've got. And there are 2 aspects to this which are crucial, and you have to keep in mind as you're going through the process. So it's minimizing blind spots or false negatives. Obviously, you cannot protect what you don't know about. The other side of that is just as important is how do you minimize noise? How do you minimize false positives? And we've recently completed a POC where we've found hundreds of percents of change of variance between actual findings that our competitor has and ones that do not belong to the organization. Now, that means you're not only paying for much more than what you actually own, but IDC research found that we spend on average half hour trying to remediate, to respond to an alert. It's much more than that half hour when it's a false positive. So we're wasting both resources and a lot of our time around false positives. So what it means is this needs to be a very comprehensive process of making sure that you find everything that you own and only what you own. And on the right side, you can actually see a list of what are the types of things that we're looking for. I mentioned fully qualified domain names, IP ranges and addresses, but there are broader things like certificates and the clouds and the type of services, whether it's web applications, emails, databases. It's putting context and technology stacks and the protocols around it. So gaining a broader understanding and context for each one of the assets, whether it's yours or one of those that you are connected to. In the next phase, once you've found an asset and assessed, validated that it does belong to your organization, there's a really broad question of how do you automate at scale? And there are a number of factors that you want to take into consideration. One of the things that we've found is that by creating a highly modular architecture, we can assess different assets based on their category. So a mail server, a DNS server, and a web application will have very different assessment processes. Each one of them will be tailored to the needs and possible vulnerabilities of that asset type. Just as an example, when we look at web applications, one of the key items that we look and even enumerate is there a login page? And that's for obvious reasons. A login page is an entry point. It's the gateway to your system. And it also always involves PII. So these are two very important things to take into consideration. When you break out to that modular architecture, it's not only about scaling, it's also about the ability to quickly adapt. And what I mean by that is, as new threats show up on the landscape, and invariably they do, the ability to add more tests, to add more scans to that set that you're running is what enables an organization to basically protect itself, not just today, but to be ready to move forward very quickly as things change. And invariably they do. Do no harm is not just, it's not just for doctors. What I mean in this context is external attack surface scans everything that you've got. This means it's going to be scanning production systems, among other things. And it is critical that you will do no harm. It means minimize risk to those applications. It means there cannot be impact on performance. You cannot change data as part of the assessment process. Now, as many of you are probably familiar with, there are different types of penetration testing, DAS and BAS, different breach and attack simulations that take a very heavy toll on the application or asset that they are testing at any given time. This means that those approaches are not suitable to run as an external, continuous process when you're talking about production systems. And just as a last point, as I mentioned in the discovery, that you need to go outside and understand what can impact you externally. The same is true at the assessment level. So it is looking at those external connections and identifying what can come back to put your own asset at risk. The next stage in this thing is about contextualizing and prioritizing. When we started this conversation, we mentioned just how many assets an enterprise has. We saw how many vulnerabilities are being added, and these are just the documented ones. We're not, we haven't even talked about your own applications and just trivial misconfigurations and things like that. So the security issues are an order of magnitude larger than just the documented CVEs. So when you look at all of the assets and you enumerate all of the security issues, it's now time to make sense out of it, because if you recall, our end game is to be very focused in order to make a significant impact in risk reduction. This means that issue severity is a very crucial and important starting point, but it's not the end game. What you want to know on any given asset, is there an actual attack vector, a known attack vector? How sophisticated is it? Is it something that a 12-year-old hacker can do, or does it really require more sophistication? What will be the impact of that breach on the business, on the brand? Whether it's financial or whether it's the brand reputation. What does this mean? And we can broadly categorize this into two groups. One is exploitability. The second one we call importance. Exploitability is putting together all of the threat intelligence around things like documented exploit and penetration testing, and those less sophisticated but just as important things like cloud misconfigurations, weak or no passwords, open ports, and many more. On the importance side, what we want to do is be able to contextualize assets into how important, how can we rank them as how important they are to the business. And there are four main factors around this, and a larger group of indicators that feed into this. Things like sensitive data. If there is sensitive data in that specific asset, that is obviously an important factor. Same goes with operational impact. If a specific asset is highly connected within my organization, if it goes down, so will all of its connections. Brand reputation, things like websites where defacement will impact me, and it's something that my customers will automatically be exposed to. That's obviously another factor, as is business important. How central is this asset to the business? So overlaying these contexts brings the understanding and the clarity that you need to actually have focus. Just to give you an example, because I keep repeating or keep going back to the idea of external assets, just to give you an example that we ran into quite recently, one of our customers has a web application that has an integrated ad server or ad service from one of the leading ad tech vendors. That ad server sat or was hosted on cloud storage. In this specific case, it was AWS. It was a multi-tenant S3 bucket that was left exposed. When we scanned out, we were able to identify that and actually get in touch with the ad service company to make sure that this was fixed, because this type of vulnerability, had it been breached, would impact not only our customer, but like any type of supply chain, any other tenant that was using that service on that specific S3 bucket. And there were quite a few of them. So this is just to give you that idea. And going back to the immediately exploitable risks, which are which are those types of misconfigurations, missing passwords. 20% of those are external. They're not on your assets, but they are external assets that you are connected to, and an exploit of them will immediately impact your organization. Quick summary, we've gone through 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, 3 is a discover, assess, prioritize your exploitable attack surface. So we can sort of stop here, but that means we didn't do the effective part of the risk reduction. The next step is, what do we need to look at when we're actually going on the offensive and taking action? The concept here, or the goal here, is to accelerate and simplify. And we do this in multiple ways. The first one is actionable focus. And by actionable, one of the things that we try to convey is and deliver, it's an action item. It's no longer about security issues. It doesn't matter, how you prioritize, how you look at it. But what you want to do is have the most precise list of action items and have them prioritized in a way that will reach the most impact as far as risk reduction. So those action items need to have as part of their information, obviously things like the evidence and the impact, so being able to have as a fuller story. It also is important to know as much as possible and automatically assign ownership, whether it is the automatic assignment by subsidiary or the more sophisticated version of assigning to a specific function within the organization, so that they will be able to get to the right destination as quickly as possible within your team and all of the partnership around DevOps, development, and the various other teams across the organization. The way to get it across is with workflow automation, and it is with integration across ticketing, SIEM, and SOAR systems. The closed loop part of that is to make sure that any fix is automatically validated and removed from your list of attack surface action items. Again, one thing I do want to note here is what happens with the external risks. And one of the reasons it's important to bring it up is we've heard countless times the notion that if it's not mine, it's not my risk, but also, okay, so it's a risk. Now, what can I do about it? And one of the things that we're seeing is, first of all, specifically, and again, uniquely to Cyberpion, we provide something that is called action protection on a specific class of immediately and critical vulnerable assets. We're able to freeze the asset so that it prevents attackers from actually seizing it. In additional cases, like in the supply chain example, we are able to mitigate the risk with that third-party supply chain vendor. And in certain cases, the right thing to do is to manage your third-party relationship or even disconnect that specific connection, depending on the severity of the risk. So there are multiple things that can be done to mitigate those risks. It's a matter of identifying them before it's too late. Just to give you a broad picture of what this looks like on a customer, this is a Fortune 100 customer that has been, and what you're seeing is a graph over the past 2 years. You can see that their mean time to resolution has gone down from 217 days down to 4. So a significant improvement over time. And while there are fluctuations, the number of vulnerabilities that they're seeing is decreasing. Another thing to note, although it cannot be seen in the graph, is that over those two years, we've implemented 40 active protections for this customer. And one of the things that this means is that by blocking that exploitable risk and freezing the asset, we give the customer enough time to properly remediate the issue without having to bear the risk. And again, just quickly summarizing what we've gone through here. So going on the offensive it's a mind shift. It's not about looking to protect everything. It's not about looking to eliminate risk. It is about understanding the complexity and scale and dynamic nature of the IT world that we live in and the threat landscape, and figuring out a strategic approach to broadening visibility into everything that we have and can impact us, being able to automatically and efficiently analyze everything, understand it, and then this becomes the strategy and the focus that we need to actually take action and effectively reduce risk by moving against the most important and most urgent issues that we are facing at any given day. And this summarizes a proactive approach to reducing risk and attack prevention. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Tally. Great information there. So yeah, again, just to repeat, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A box. I'll also mention again that we did record today's presentation, and we'll be sending out a link to the recording to everybody who participated within the next day or so. We have a couple of questions that have started to come in, Tally. One of which is, you mentioned that attack surface is 30% bigger than you think. Are there particular types of assets that tend to be overlooked more than others?
I think the most widely known category of unknown assets today is shadow IT. It's the fact that any employee with a credit card can spin off a new asset without IT or security oversight. The second category that we're seeing a lot of is around companies that have executed multiple M&As throughout their lifetime. And every new acquisition comes with its own digital baggage. Sometimes you are aware, but a lot of times there is lack of awareness around how much there actually is, and that gets overlooked over time. So I think those two are the two leading ones that I would mention.
Okay. And sort of on a related note, are there particular types of assets, whether they're known or unknown, that are more vulnerable than others? Like where are we seeing like the severity in terms of the type of assets?
So as a generalization, the most important thing to a company or to an organization is its data, whether it's customers' data, private information, or IP. So, databases on the one hand, but applications and APIs on the other are the ones that are dealing with that data. That makes them more rewarding targets for attackers, and therefore, by their nature, more vulnerable.
Okay. So obviously this wasn't necessarily a sales pitch type of webinar, but we're getting a couple of questions just about the Cyberpion attack surface management platform. You mentioned proof of concept, POC, and someone's asking how long does a POC usually take when we get started working with a new client on the platform?
So I would separate between two different concepts that we have. One is proof of value, and the second one is proof of concept. Proof of value, because we are an external attack surface management platform, we are able, with your organization's permission, and just your email or Apex domain, to scan, within a couple of days, usually 2-3, depending on the size, to scan your organization, and then we can show you a highlight of the results. We can actually discuss our findings and our recommendations about moving forward. A POC is once you've decided to move forward, it's more about a hands-on type of experience where you can experience that our platform and our portal for yourself.
Okay, makes sense. Another kind of more practical question: how many people does it typically take to implement, an external attack surface management platform like Cyberpion?
On our customer side, none.
Okay.
It is, you will be interacting and working with our SaaS portal, but the back-end discovery, assessment, prioritization is a completely automated process that you will receive the outcome of, and be then able to manage the results.
Okay. And then how about on an ongoing basis post-implementation?
We have teams, or a lot of our customers typically would put one person who looks at this on a regular basis and is the lead. That person would then coordinate and send the tickets or the relevant information across to the various stakeholders as tickets or action items that they need to take care of. The The alternative model is companies that have multiple subsidiaries. We do have the ability to provide the access control so that each subsidiary will be able to see its own part of the attack surface and automatically get assigned its own issues and action items, where the centralized, whether it's headquarters or centralized security operations center, will be able to get the oversight and high level visibility across that entire organization.
Okay. And I think that's about it for questions right now. So Tally, if somebody wanted to get more information or schedule a demo of the Cyberpion platform, where should they go? We've got resources right on the website, correct?
Correct. You can go to our website. You'll have everything there, and just fill in a contact form, and we'll get back to you to schedule the proof of value or answer any questions that you have.
All right, sounds good. Well, thanks very much, Talia. It's Tally Netzer, Director of Product Marketing here at Cyberpion. Thanks very much for the presentation, Tally.
Thank you.
And that'll conclude today's webinar. As I mentioned, we'll be sending you a link to the recording, but we will have another webinar scheduled in the attack surface prevention webinar series coming up soon. So keep an eye out on your email for that. And thanks very much. We'll see you at a future Cyberpion event.